Like most politicians, Jacinta Allan likes to talk about compassion, but in practice she is heartless, cruel, and in my opinion, wicked. About 3,000 years ago, King Solomon wrote that the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. That's Proverbs 12 verse 10. And nowhere is that clearer right now than in Jacinta Allan's tender mercy for young, violent migrants who commit home invasions, carjackings, thefts, and machete attacks, and the continued compassionate catch and release program that is run by Victoria Police and the courts on Jacinta Allan's watch, despite her promise months ago that Victoria would soon have the toughest bail laws. I hardly need to tell you that crime in the name of compassion is completely out of control. Violent death is a daily headline in Melbourne newspapers, and if people aren't getting stabbed or shot, then they're battling to survive home invasions by barricading themselves inside their own homes for fear that they will end up with their heads cut off and put on a spike. And that's to say nothing of the people who have had their hands cut off for a mobile phone, or of the carjackings, routine theft from stores like Bunnings, and most recently the street killings of two teenagers just a block away from each other on the same night. The fact is that murders like this aren't someone's first crime. The perpetrators of these murders are going to be known to police. They've probably been arrested and released multiple times before they escalated to committing these murders. We've had plenty of warning that they were on the pathway to this sort of violent crime. And yet, in the name of compassion, they were released over and over again. The father of one of the murdered boys says that he wants answers, and I can understand that. But the fact is, we already know what happened. His son was killed by Jacinta Allan's compassion. His son is dead because Jacinta Allan was too compassionate to enforce justice on young violent criminals if those young violent criminals were from immigrant communities. So now other young men from those same immigrant communities have been killed by Jacinta Allan's compassion. And if you believe our politicians and our media, then people like me, heartless people like me, evil people who've been saying for years and years that we should come down hard on youth criminals, give them adult time for adult crimes, and even, in my case, going so far as to say that we should allow their fathers and their uncles and the other men in their lives of these wayward youngsters to belt the ever-loving shit out of them if that's what it's going to take to get them to pull their heads in. People like me who insist that we should allow law-abiding victims to arm themselves so that they can defend themselves from these young punks and make these young punks actually face some consequences for their actions. Heartless people like me are apparently the problem. Even though we predicted that this day would come, that there would be a day when fathers would be burying their sons so that our political elites could grandstand on the graves of the dead and talk about their compassion, like Jacinta Allan advertising her compassion, while in reality caring nothing for the grief and the death that she is responsible for causing. King Solomon had a lot to say about the importance of discipline, particularly physical discipline, violence in discipline. But today we think we're too civilized for corporal punishment, that we've advanced beyond the need for physical punishment to correct people. Somehow we've come to believe that discipline involving violence against the guilty makes us just as evil as the person who used violence against the innocent. We've deluded ourselves into this false moral equivalence and into believing that somehow a counselling session and a second chance, or a 10th chance, or a 100th chance is going to fix them. Well, tell that to the fathers and the mothers of these murdered children. There's no more chances for these victims, which means that we gave too many chances to the murderers. True compassion requires us to enforce discipline against the guilty, violently when necessary, in order to protect the innocent. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to cut through the crap and to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us. Now, if you appreciate having someone saying what you're thinking, then please help me to keep the Topher Project going by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And if you like my videos, you will love my books, DVDs, and merch at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. The truth is that if you care about someone, if you have real compassion for a fellow human being and you see them going down this pathway towards violent crime and gang activity, then you'll do whatever it takes to pull them out of that death spiral. And if you allow them to continue their violence, especially if you're in a position of authority where you have the power to put an end to their violence and stop them from descending deeper into that death spiral, you have that power, but you choose not to use it, then you have no compassion whatsoever for their victims, but also you have no compassion whatsoever for them, the perpetrators. There is nothing compassionate about releasing a violent 14-year-old back onto the streets with barely a slap on the wrist so that they can continue their violence deeper into that death spiral, emboldened by their encounter with our weakest piss police and courts, and now with more street cred than ever before. There is nothing compassionate about that. We are so arrogant today to think that human nature today is somehow different and better and more noble than what it's been in the past. That the methods that were necessary to dealing with violent criminals 200 years ago are now obsolete somehow. That they're barbaric and no longer necessary in these more enlightened times. That's nonsense. Sure, our technology has advanced, our veneer of civilization has become very sophisticated, but underneath that, humans are not different or better than we were thousands of years ago. And if you doubt me, then let the current crime wave that's taken over the suburbs of Melbourne serve as our caution that human nature today is no better than it has ever been. There are people who, for whatever reason, end up speaking the language of violence fluently. And when the only language someone speaks is the language of violence, then the only discipline they will understand is discipline that uses violence. When someone reaches that point where violence is the only future that they will know, then the use of violence to change their direction, to change that future, to rescue them from themselves is compassion. And allowing them to continue into that death spiral of violence is wickedness. Now, whether you view the Bible as the Word of God or just as an interesting historical curiosity, I think it's valuable to understand the wisdom of the ages and to recognize that the modern fad for soft discipline is just that, a modern fad that is as absurd today as what it would have been in ancient Rome. And so much of what we're seeing today, the mental health crisis, the over-medication of our kids, the depression and anxiety and anger and hopelessness, not to mention the total disrespect for human life and property that we are witnessing from so many young people today, all of that is a direct consequence of our cultural rejection of discipline. Real, actual, physical discipline, and our abandonment of real consequences via the police, via the courts, which is, of course, a logical extension of the abandonment of parental discipline as well. I quoted Proverbs 12:10 earlier, that the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel, and how these kids are killing each other because of the wickedness of Jacinta Allan and her wicked distortion of compassion. But some people look at these situations and they throw their hands up in the air and say, well, what else can we do? Because after all, our prison system does a terrible job of reforming criminals as well. And they're right. Animal Justice Party MP Georgie Purcell has made a big deal out of the idea that bail saves lives because locking young offenders up so often leads them down a path to lifelong criminality. And she's not wrong. Our justice system, our prisons do a terrible job of reforming people, but the thing that she's missing is that even prison is not much of a punishment these days. It's just time. Wait a while and it's over. Our justice system sucks, and prisons don't do a very good job of reforming criminals. That's true, but King Solomon 3,000 years ago had the answer for that already. because he was a big advocate of the one thing that's missing from our prisons and our justice system and from our child raising today. Parental discipline with love, in the case of parents, but also in our justice system, physical, corporal punishment, because in King Solomon's view, there's something that physical punishment does to you that no soft punishment can do. In Proverbs 20, verse 30, he says, bruising wounds clean away evil, as do stripes the inner depths of the heart. Now, when he speaks of stripes, he's talking about the cane at best, but probably he's talking about the whip. He's speaking of bruising. These aren't mere slaps on the hand. This is physical discipline, and it's serious. But that's barbaric, say the bleeding hearts. No. Barbaric is a civilization that lets teenagers run amok, releasing them repeatedly back onto the streets so they can continue their reign of violent terror against their innocent victims. That's barbaric. I'm going to play you some video, and fair warning, it's hard to watch. It's security footage of one of the killings that took place last week in the western suburbs of Melbourne. This is it. I'm not going to play the sound. But believe me, it is horrific. There's 3 violent little shits walking up a quiet suburban street, and soon afterwards, their victim literally running for his life before he is cut down with exactly the kind of machete that Jacinta Allan supposedly banned. And that's that. A life cut short. No pun intended. The boy didn't die instantly. Believe me, you don't want to hear the noises he makes as his 3 attackers lay into him like the fucking animal cowards that they are. There is a strong possibility that their victim, the boy who we just saw, wasn't even the intended target. Mistaken identity. But what we can say for sure is that the perpetrators, those 3 assholes, will be known to police already. This is not their first rodeo. No one goes from a clean record to murdering people in the street in a single step. This is Jacinta Allan's wickedness at work. The tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. This young man met a cruel end because Jacinta Allan extends her tender mercies, her compassion, to young, violent criminals, releasing them time and time again. The father of one of the 2 murdered boys is quoted as saying, "I need answers for what killed my son." He also says, "I'm talking in front of the cameras right now on behalf of my community. This is happening to us." Well, I mean no disrespect to a grieving father, but this isn't only happening to your community, it's being done by members of your community, and someone in your community knows who they are. Now, I'm sorry that our justice system let you down. I'm sorry that in the name of politically convenient compassion, Jacinta Allan has allowed evil and wickedness to flourish in our streets. I'm sorry that you came here to get away from war and suffering and violence only to find that our murderous compassion has allowed some, a small number, of your community to create a new war on our streets. But let's get real. The police know the answers, but they have lacked the courage to speak the truth. Nor do our courts have courage. It's their order-following cowardice that brought us incidents like this in the first place. In Proverbs 29:2, Solomon says, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people mourn." Victoria is ruled by wickedness, aided and abetted by the cowardice of our police who know what needs to be done and said, but choose to stay silent in order to keep their jobs, their paychecks. And also aided and abetted by judges and magistrates who do what they're told to do and not what they know is right. The only language these boys speak is the language of violence, and if you care about these boys, if you love these young men enough to want to save their futures from themselves and what they are becoming, then you will recognize that the only way to save them is to start speaking to them in the only language they understand. This is why we need castle law in Australia, just for starters. Not that it would have helped these young victims, this young man cut down in that video that I showed you in this case. It wouldn't have helped. But see, it's doubtful that any of these thugs who attacked and murdered those boys would have ever become the murderous thugs that they are today if, at some point in the past, Last month or last year, they had come face to face with an armed and angry homeowner while they were committing their earlier crimes, the carjackings, the home invasions that no doubt came before they escalated to the point where they are now murdering people in the streets. The most compassionate thing for these young punks right now is for their next intended victim to speak to them in their own language. Now, reasonable force is the legal requirement when using violence in self-defense. And if you legitimately fear for your life, and in my opinion it is reasonable to believe that if a pack of young thugs break into your home or set upon you anywhere else with weapons, then it is their intent to end your life. And in that situation, it is reasonable to defend your life as if your life depends on it, because it probably does. And that is the best thing that could happen to these thugs. The most compassionate thing that anyone could do for them right now is for them to meet their match, to have a long conversation with someone who is fluent in their native tongue, violence. It would do them a world of good to spend 6 months in hospital eating through a straw as they wait for the fragments of their face to fuse back together. For them to forever have a limp because their broken pelvis never fully healed, meaning they'll never chase down another victim as long as they live. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating vigilantes to go out and hunt these pathetic punks down. But I am advocating for law-abiding people to be ready and willing to speak their language should these punks try and talk to you in violence. Jacinta Allan is a wicked leader that has brought death and suffering in the name of compassion. Our police could make all the difference if they just had the courage to call it out, to condemn Jacinta for enabling this wave of violence, to refuse to comply with these frankly disgusting, immoral court orders to release and re-release known violent offenders back onto the streets. But the police, up to this point as I record this, are choosing to keep their jobs instead of standing up for the victims of violent crime. They are literally choosing a future where we will watch more people be murdered in the streets rather than risking losing their paycheck because they spoke out. They're cowards. Everyone that remains silent is a coward, and there is blood on every single paycheck for as long as they stay silent. And that won't change till they start to speak. And our courts? Well, they are worthy of our complete and utter contempt, because magistrates and judges daily betray any principle of justice by letting thugs back onto the streets in the name of compassion. And they throw their hands up in the air. Oh, there's nothing we can do. It is contemptible. All of them are worthy of nothing but derision and contempt. And that's how we get here. This is life and death now. There's no question about that. Every time someone comes at you with any level of violence, you have to assume that you're fighting for your life now. You cannot afford to take the risk that maybe they're only going to harm you. Because if you find out that you're wrong, it'll be too late. Every single encounter is life and death now. And if the courts, the cops, and our wicked leaders won't do the right thing, the really compassionate thing, and use violence against these young punks, then it falls to us to do it in self-defense, of course. And to back each other up when we are inevitably arrested by these coward cops, when we're condemned by these wicked leaders and the media, and judged by these contemptible courts. As the old saying goes, it is better to be judged by 12 than to be carried by 6. Defending yourself against people who are a threat to your life isn't just the right thing to do. It isn't just the compassionate thing for you to do for the sake of your family and your loved ones. It is also the compassionate thing for you to do against these thugs. Argue with them in their language and win the argument. It's time to put an end to the cruelty by beating the ever-loving shit out of the cruel. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and this is what I do. I say what needs to be said, come hell or high water. Now, if you appreciate that I do this and you'd like to help me to speak even more, and perhaps to even more people than who I already reach, then please help me to keep the Topher Project going by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And if you think my videos are confronting, well, you're going to love my books about government, power, perverse incentives, and civil disobedience. You'll find my books, DVDs, t-shirts, and hoodies at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, share with others, and let me know in the comments how much you think it's going to take before the wickedness of Jacinta Allan is brought to an end. And as always, think free.